Key events, we talked about the port lease and their agreements. A little bit, the Cal ISO, South Bay Power Plant. We got a letter, a series of letters actually, that said 2 of 3 things had to happen before that power plant could go down. One of them said Sunrise had to be finished. That won't happen until 2012. If you read the Union Tribune, it talks about lawsuits that could extend that beyond that. The Otay Mesa generating facility will come online. You'll see different numbers for that because it's based on the temperature of the air at the time. But Laura was right. It's nameplated at 560 to 585. And 3 was and additional peaking capacity. But the phrase that was really important was at least. They left the thing open there that could be all 3, and that concerns us. We talk about, again, the burden of South Bay and those issues. The Cal ISO, a number of our council members and a couple of mayors have gone up there to Sacramento and San Francisco and met with the PUC, met with the Cal ISO, trying to get this information out of them, and this is kind of what we heard. So the long-term procurement plan for the city of San Diego, and I actually did this before the bid occurred, but they said you had to have 400 megawatts without Sunrise to close down South Bay. And then lo and behold, on the 10th of June, 15th of June, SDG&E came up with a bid that they call Request for Offers. And that bid said, we need 7 products for power. And 2 of those were to build generation, gas-fired generation, somewhere in the San Diego area. They didn't say it had to be in Chula Vista, but they said it had to be somewhere in San Diego. And at that bid conference actually mentioned that South Bay is a problematic facility in terms of the bid because it might be going away, so be careful how you bid if you have ones through cooling. Because there's a bunch of stuff happening at the state, there's a bunch of stuff happening locally that could close down ones through cooling power plants. It's not very reliable if there's a risk you might close down. So why would you want to have it as on a list of facilities that are there in case of high-risk needs? Doesn't make sense. So the long-term procurement plant's at 400. We know today that there's a 50 megawatt plant that's at like 46 that is just starting up. It's finished in construction. It's going through testing at Miramar. That was before the 400 number came out. So hopefully that lowers 400 to 350, right? Simple math, you would think. And then 98 megawatts. Orange Grove is up there by Paula and Fallbrook. That's a plant that construction has just begun. So again, we would hope that those 2 numbers would help carve down the 400 number to get rid of South Bay. Now, the next one is, at the time, we had the power plant on Main Street, which was being proposed for 100. That's obviously off the table. And then there were some Larkspur wildfire and other possible increases. Those are up by the prisons also. Those haven't occurred. And then SDG&E generation RFP was expected in May. They got it out in June or July. June 15th. Next slide. This is actually a map of the South San Diego area, and those numbers you can't see off to the left, those are substations. Each of those are those places where you have all the wires come into a place with a bunch of steel to provide and step down electricity for a neighborhood. And this is, the area of Main Street. I want to point out these areas. This is the area of Main Street, that the Main Street facility was located. This is an area, one of the areas we're talking about proposing peakers to help replace this and the South Bay Power Plant. This was an area that was discussed by you and your 200 neighbors. When we were in the discussions about MMC last year, people said, why are you building it here? Why don't you build it over here? And don't build it at least 1,000 feet away from residents, and build it in an industrial zone area. These sites that we've looked at and talk about in a minute all qualify in that respect. The other thing was when the South Bay Power Plant was being proposed, all facilities, when they go through the EIR process, have to have alternatives. And one of the things they talked about, just like they talked about this as being an alternative for this, they said, an alternative ought to be out here where nobody lives. And that's another area that we're looking at. Next slide. And by the way, I have some of these maps for you to take if you're interested.
Why do we need so much? If the one comes on the line out that you're talking about, it's what, 460 megawatts or something like that? You've got 2 or 3 peakers already online out off of Main Street. Why do you keep making these peakers?
There's no peakers on Main Street, except for MMC, which is 46.
Out by
Otay Mesa.
Otay Mesa, there's 2 or 3 peakers out there.
Okay. Well, I'm going to throw a lot of numbers at you, and Teresa asked me not to do that. But let me just, this is not my math, this is the state's math. And I work in this field a lot, and it's hard to understand, and it's not very clear. but I'm going to tell you that on the really bad days in San Diego, we use about 4,800 megawatts of power. When it gets really, really hot, everybody's got the air conditioners on at home and at work. It's about 4,800 megawatts of power. On the lower days, we only use about 2,800 megawatts of power. We only have a new generation, baseload generation. We really only have the facility in Escondido, which is about 565 megawatts of power, and we will now have the place in Otay Mesa, which is about 585. So that's about 1,100, 1,200 megawatts of power. Carlsbad, that's the old dirty plant that operates like South Bay, is 900, and South Bay is 709. Those were built in 1955, 1958, and 1960. And so back then we had 1,600. We're replacing it 45 years later with 1,200. But our population has almost tripled since then in the county. So there's a greater demand, and what we've done is we've built some small things around the county, mostly as backup, and then we've imported all the difference on transmission lines. And SDG's plan is to import more. And the Cal ISO is saying you can't rely on importing everything. They want to see something in the basin. Some people would like to see more distributed clean generation, more solar on homes and businesses, and some of these state agencies say you got to have more power. Yes, Maria?
Isn't that true that although the population had grown 3 times as it was compared to the 60s, the demand has gone down because people are more conscious about saving energy, and then all the appliances at home are energy saving, and then people are doing some retrofitting, and people are more conscious about that.
Some of that is very true, but as an example, and this is a big rough example to show you, if somebody moved from a 12 to 1,500 square foot home on the west side of Chula Vista that maybe used 600 or 700 kilowatt hours of electricity a month. Look at your bill. You probably all use somewhere between 500 and 800 kilowatts. So if you're using 600 or 700 kilowatts and your house wasn't very energy efficient, but it's small, you know, a lot of people lived in a small area, that's one thing. Then you go buy a new house in Otay Ranch, 2,800 to 3,500 square feet. It's 10 times more energy efficient, but it's much bigger, and it has air conditioning. The one on the west side didn't. It tends to use more total energy for that family, even though on a per square foot basis, it's much more efficient. So in general, our load has gone up dramatically since then. But in some cases, like this year to last year, it's down. The economy is causing us to use less energy. So it varies. These sites, very important, I want to point out to you, because I think this is important, it means something to you. Remember what I said near the landfill? This is the landfill line right there. This is Main Street. This is one of the 3 sites right here that we're considering, and these are the other 2 sites. And by considering, what I mean was when SDGD put out an RFO, we had been working for over a year and a half to try to figure out what were some of the proper types, because the council said, go find a way to replace the South Bay power plant. Now let me mention something else. It's not the primary concern, but it's important to be fully honest to tell you this. The South Bay power plant used to generate $4 or $5 million a year in income. Today it's generating a couple $1 million of income for the city. The general fund goes to pay for police, fire, libraries, rec, staff, all that stuff for all those programs. When the power plant goes away, that income goes away with it. So one of the benefits of putting a power plant somewhere in the city is to hasten and guarantee that the other power plants go away, if you can write it right and make sure they promise that. And the other thing is it generates some, it won't generate anywhere near as much, but some of the income that you're going to